I said step back now. You don't get to decide the rules here.
I followed medical protocol. That patient needed immediate care. I did my job.
Turn around, hands behind your back.
This isn't over.
The initial call crackled through the radio with a deceptive calm. Unit 22, respond to a medical emergency. Liberty Park, Central Pavilion. Adult male, difficulty breathing. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind of bright, cloudless day that promised anything but crisis. For Leo Martinez, a 15-year veteran paramedic with the River City Fire Department, a call like this was routine. It could be asthma, a panic attack, or a dozen other minor ailments that felt catastrophic to the person experiencing them. He navigated the ambulance through the light city traffic. His partner, a younger, sharp-eyed EMT named Sam Jones, reviewing the map on the console. They were on scene in under 6 minutes. Liberty Park was an oasis of green in the urban sprawl, and the Central Pavilion was a popular spot for morning joggers and families. As they pulled up, a small crowd had gathered, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity and genuine concern. A woman was waving frantically, directing them toward a picnic table where a man was slumped over, his face pale and beaded with sweat. Leo grabbed the primary medical bag and the oxygen tank, his movements economical and practiced. Every second was a transaction against a closing window. "I'm Leo, a paramedic. What's going on?" he said, his voice calm and authoritative, immediately taking command of the space around the patient. The frantic woman, who identified herself as the man's wife, was struggling to speak through her tears. "It's his bee allergy. He was stung. On his neck. I can't find his EpiPen. I think he left it in the car." Leo's internal alarm bells went from a low hum to a screaming siren. Anaphylaxis. A bee sting on the neck meant the swelling would be fast and localized, directly threatening the airway. He dropped to one knee beside the man, who was now making audible, high-pitched gasping sounds. Stridor, the terrifying music of a closing throat. The man's skin was blotchy and red, his lips tinged with a faint blue. He was in profound distress. "Sam, get the intubation kit ready and prep an IV, wide-open saline," Leo ordered without looking up. His fingers were already working, pulling a pre-filled syringe of epinephrine from his kit. He tore open the man's pant leg. "Sir, can you hear me? I'm going to give you a shot of epinephrine. It's going to help you breathe." The man's eyes were wide with panic, but he gave a slight, desperate nod. Leo administered the injection firmly into the man's thigh, holding it in place for a count of 10. The effect of the epinephrine should be almost immediate, but it wasn't a silver bullet. It was a stopgap, a way to buy time. He could already see the swelling on the man's neck was severe. His breathing eased slightly, but the stridor remained. This was a severe, rapidly progressing reaction. "Wife's name is Sarah," Sam reported, having gotten the patient's basic information. "Patient is Mark, 45 years old. No other known medical history." "Okay, Mark, we're going to get you some oxygen now," Leo said, fitting a non-rebreather mask over the man's face. The hiss of flowing oxygen filled the air. Leo was already preparing a second dose of epinephrine. The protocol was clear. If the patient didn't respond significantly to the first dose, a second was warranted. This was a life-or-death situation, dictated not by opinion, but by years of training and evidence-based medical science. He was in his element, a conductor in an orchestra of controlled chaos. Every piece of equipment, every drug, every action was a note played in a symphony designed to save a life. He checked Mark's pulse. It was thready and fast. His blood pressure was undoubtedly dropping. Anaphylactic shock was a cascade of systemic failure, and Leo was standing on the dam trying to plug the leaks as they appeared. He uncapped the second syringe. He knew what he had to do. He had done it hundreds of times before. But he had no idea that the greatest threat to his patient's life wasn't the bee venom coursing through his veins, but the sound of heavy, polished boots approaching on the pavement behind him. "What's going on here? Everyone back up, I need this scene secured." The voice was young, sharp, and laced with an unearned authority that grated on Leo's nerves. It was the kind of voice that saw every situation as a potential crime scene first and a human crisis second. Leo didn't turn around. He couldn't. His focus was entirely on Mark, whose breathing was becoming labored again despite the first dose of epinephrine and the oxygen. The window Leo had bought was closing faster than he'd anticipated. "Sam, push the saline. Let's get that blood pressure up," he said, his voice tight with focus. "I said, what's going on here?" the voice repeated, closer now. A shadow fell over him and his patient. Leo finally glanced up, his eyes meeting a pair of reflective sunglasses. The officer was a white male, late 20s, with a crisp uniform and a jaw set in a permanent clench. His name tag read D. Holloway. His hand was resting on his duty belt, a posture meant to convey effortless command. "Officer, I'm a paramedic treating a critical patient," Leo said, his tone professional but firm. "This man is having a severe anaphylactic reaction. I need space to work." He turned his attention back to Mark, preparing to administer the second dose of epinephrine. Officer Holloway, however, was not accustomed to being addressed as a secondary concern. He had been with the River City PD for 4 years, and in that time, he had accumulated a reputation. He saw compliance as the bedrock of public safety and viewed any hesitation to obey his commands as a challenge to his authority. To him, the scene was disorganized. The crying wife, the gathering onlookers, the paramedics on the ground. It was chaos, and his job was to impose order. "I need to know what happened here. Was there an assault? Is this man intoxicated?" Holloway's questions were a checklist from a manual that had no chapter on medical emergencies. "No, officer. He was stung by a bee," Leo replied, his patience wearing thin. "He has a known allergy. He is currently in anaphylactic shock, and if I don't continue treatment, he is going to die. Please, step back." Holloway took another step forward instead. "I'm not stepping anywhere until I get your identification and an explanation. I need to file a report. This is my scene now." The absurdity of the statement was breathtaking. This wasn't a scene, it was a man's life hanging by a thread. Leo's training, his 15 years of experience, and the state's medical protocols all screamed the same thing. The patient's immediate welfare superseded everything else. Administrative tasks like reports were for later, for after the life had been saved. "My identification is on my uniform and in the ambulance," Leo said, gesturing vaguely with his head. "You can verify my credentials with dispatch. Right now, I have to administer this medication." He held up the second syringe of epinephrine. Holloway's eyes narrowed behind his sunglasses. He saw not a medical professional performing a critical task, but a civilian defying a direct order. "Put that down," he commanded. "I need to know what's in that syringe. You are not to administer any more drugs until I have cleared this scene." The command was so profoundly ignorant, so dangerously wrong that for a moment, Leo was speechless. It was like a firefighter being told to put down his hose while a building burned because an officer needed to investigate the cause of the fire. "Officer," Leo said, his voice dropping low and steady, a final attempt at de-escalation. "This is epinephrine. It is the only thing that will keep this man's airway from closing completely. You are interfering with emergency medical treatment. That is against the law. Now, for the last time, I need you to step back and let me do my job." He did not wait for a response. He turned back to his patient, located the injection site, and prepared to save Mark's life. It was a choice born of duty and a deep, unshakable commitment to his oath. But to Officer Holloway, it was the last straw. It was an act of open defiance. The hand that grabbed Leo's shoulder was strong and unyielding. It spun him around, away from his patient, with a force that sent the prepared syringe flying from his grasp. It skittered across the concrete pavilion floor, its life-saving contents now useless. For a split second, the world seemed to slow down. Leo saw the panicked face of his partner Sam. He saw the horrified gasp of Mark's wife. Most vividly, he saw Mark on the ground, his chest heaving, his blue-tinged lips a silent testament to the oxygen he was being denied. "You're under arrest for obstruction of justice," Holloway snarled, his face inches from Leo's. The pretense of professional calm was gone, replaced by raw, undisguised fury. He was an officer who had been challenged, and this was the consequence. "What? Are you insane?" Leo's voice was a mix of disbelief and outrage. "My patient! He's dying!" He tried to pull away, to get back to Mark, but Holloway was already twisting his arm behind his back. "You should have complied when you were given a lawful order," Holloway grunted, forcing Leo's other arm back. Sam Jones, who had been frozen in shock, finally snapped into action. "Officer, stop! You don't understand! He needs that medication! His airway is closing!" He started to move toward the backup medical kit. "You stay where you are or you'll be next!" Holloway shouted, his attention divided for a moment. It was the only opening Leo needed. He wasn't resisting arrest. He was trying to save a life. He planted his feet and tried to turn back toward Mark. It was a mistake. Holloway interpreted the move as resistance. He slammed Leo forward against the picnic table, the wood biting into his cheek. The crowd gasped. Several people had their phones out, the small red recording lights blinking like malevolent eyes. They were documenting a man's life potentially ending, not from a bee sting, but from a catastrophic failure of judgment by a man with a badge. Then came the sound that would echo in Leo's nightmares for years. The cold, metallic click-click of handcuffs being ratcheted tight around his wrists. The steel was unforgiving, biting into his skin. The pain was sharp, but it was nothing compared to the agony of his helplessness. He was a paramedic, a healer, and he was being physically restrained from doing the one thing he was sworn to do. "Someone, help my patient," Leo managed to say, his face pressed against the rough-hewn wood of the table. "Sam, the epi, get the spare epi." Sam was already there, his hands shaking but his training taking over. He pulled a second pre-filled syringe from the kit on the ground. He knelt beside Mark, whose gasps for air were now terrifyingly faint. Mark's wife was sobbing uncontrollably, her pleas mixing with the angry shouts from the onlookers. "What are you doing to him? He was helping my husband!" Holloway ignored them all. He had his suspect in custody. He had restored order. He hauled Leo to his feet and began marching him toward his patrol car. Leo stumbled, his eyes locked on the scene he was being dragged from. He watched Sam administer the second dose of epinephrine, praying it wasn't too late. The delay was unforgivable. In cases of severe anaphylaxis, the time between onset and treatment is measured in seconds, not minutes. Holloway had stolen minutes, precious, life-sustaining minutes. As Holloway shoved him into the hard plastic back seat of the patrol car, Leo looked back one last time. He saw his partner beginning chest compressions. Mark had gone into cardiac arrest. The worst-case scenario had arrived. The patrol car door slammed shut, sealing Leo in a cage of plastic and steel, the sound of his patient's wife's screams muffled but not silenced. He had followed his training. He had followed his oath. And for that, he was in handcuffs, watching a man die because an officer with a fragile ego decided seeing his ID was more important than a human life. The drive to the downtown precinct was a surreal 10-minute journey through a city that was completely oblivious to the life-or-death drama that had just unfolded. The radio in Officer Holloway's car crackled with the mundane chatter of traffic stops and noise complaints, a stark contrast to the frantic calls for a backup ambulance and a supervisor that Leo knew Sam would be making. Holloway didn't speak a word to him. He drove with a rigid posture, his eyes fixed forward, a man convinced he had done everything by the book. Leo sat in the back, the handcuffs digging deeper into his wrists with every bump in the road. He wasn't thinking about his rights or the legality of his arrest. He was running a clock in his head. The time from the arrest to Sam administering the second dose of epi. The time Mark was without a pulse. The likelihood of an anoxic brain injury. Every tick of the clock was another dead brain cell. He felt a profound sense of failure, not his own, but one that had been forced upon him. At the station, Holloway paraded him through the main bullpen as if he'd just brought in a dangerous felon. Heads turned. A few officers who knew Leo from dropping off patients at the ER gave him looks of confusion. They knew him as the calm, competent paramedic who could handle the city's worst traumas with a steady hand. Seeing him in handcuffs was a violation of the natural order of things. The booking sergeant was a heavy-set older man named Miller, with tired eyes that had seen every flavor of human foolishness. He looked at Leo, then at Holloway. "What do we have here, Dean?" "Obstruction of justice and resisting an officer," Holloway announced, his voice filled with self-importance. "This is the paramedic from the Liberty Park call. Refused to identify himself, refused to follow lawful orders, and interfered with my scene." Sergeant Miller's eyebrows rose slightly. "The medical call? The one where the guy coded?" News traveled fast. "He was interfering by what? Giving medical aid?" "He was uncooperative," Holloway snapped, his tone defensive. "I had to secure the scene." Miller let out a slow, weary sigh and looked at Leo. "Let's get this over with." The process was methodical and deeply humiliating. Fingerprints were taken, the black ink staining his hands. A mugshot was snapped, the flashbulb freezing his expression of weary disbelief for eternity. He was ordered to remove his belt and shoelaces. They took his wallet, his keys, his phone. As the booking officer cataloged his belongings, he pulled out Leo's wallet and paused, reading the laminated cards inside. State paramedic license, active. National Registry paramedic, active. Advanced cardiac life support. Pediatric advanced life support. The officer read them aloud, his voice trailing off as he understood the full picture. He looked from the impressive credentials to the man in the rumpled uniform standing before him. The pieces didn't fit. "Did you sustain any injuries during the arrest?" Miller asked, his voice now a little softer. It was a standard question, but in this context it felt different. "No," Leo replied, his voice hoarse. "But my patient did." He met Miller's eyes. "Officer Holloway prevented me from administering life-saving medication. He was in anaphylactic shock. He arrested me while I was trying to treat him. You need to document that. You need to get my partner's report." Miller's gaze shifted to Holloway, who was leaning against a wall trying to project an air of nonchalance. The sergeant's expression hardened. He knew a public and legal disaster when he saw one. He made a note on the booking form. This was no longer a simple obstruction charge. This had the potential to be so much more. Finally, Leo was led to a small concrete holding cell. The heavy metal door slammed shut with a deafening clang, the sound of a system that had processed him without any regard for context or truth. He sat on the cold metal bench, the smell of antiseptic and despair filling his nostrils. He was a healer locked in a cage. Outside the bars, he could see the life of the station continuing on, officers typing reports, laughing over coffee. He was invisible to them. He was just another number, another body in the system. The adrenaline that had sustained him for the past hour began to fade, replaced by a cold, heavy weight in the pit of his stomach. What had happened to Mark? Was he alive? The uncertainty was a form of torture more punishing than any physical restraint. He put his head in his hands, not in defeat, but in a moment of quiet, desperate prayer for the man whose life he had been forced to abandon. Time in a holding cell stretches and compresses in strange ways. Minutes felt like hours as Leo replayed the scene at the park over and over, searching for a different choice he could have made, a different word he could have used to get through to Holloway. But every scenario ended the same way. The officer's ego was a wall no amount of logic could have breached. He was trapped in a loop of what-ifs, when a sharp, clear voice cut through the monotonous hum of the station. "I'm here to see Leo Martinez. My name is Eleanor Vance. I'm his attorney." Leo looked up. Standing outside his cell speaking to Sergeant Miller was a woman in her early 40s. She was dressed in a perfectly tailored dark gray suit, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She carried a leather briefcase and an air of absolute, unshakable confidence. She didn't look like she was asking for permission. She looked like she was announcing an established fact. Sergeant Miller, who had been on the phone with what sounded like an increasingly agitated fire department supervisor, looked relieved. "Right this way, counselor." Eleanor Vance walked to the front of his cell. Her eyes were intelligent and direct. They scanned him quickly, assessing his condition before meeting his gaze. "Mr. Martinez, I'm Eleanor Vance. Your union representative got a call from your partner, Sam Jones. They called me. I specialize in civil rights cases, particularly those involving misconduct by law enforcement. It seems you've had a rather eventful morning." The relief that washed over Leo was so immense, it almost brought him to his knees. He hadn't been forgotten. Sam had made the call. The system outside the police department was already moving. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "Save your thanks for when we get you out of here," she said crisply, setting her briefcase down on a nearby bench and pulling out a legal pad and a pen. "I need you to tell me everything that happened. From the moment you got the call, do not leave out a single detail, no matter how insignificant it seems. What he said, what you said, where his hands were, who was watching, everything." As Leo recounted the story, Eleanor listened with an intensity that was almost unnerving. She didn't interrupt, but her pen flew across the page, capturing the timeline with meticulous precision. He told her about the patient Mark, the diagnosis of anaphylaxis, the stridor, the first dose of epinephrine. He described Holloway's arrival, his aggressive tone, his demand to secure the scene. He detailed his own attempts to explain the medical necessity of his actions and Holloway's escalating refusal to listen. He described the arrest, the spilled syringe, and his final, horrifying view of his patient going into cardiac arrest. When he finished, Eleanor clicked her pen. She asked a series of sharp, clarifying questions. "Did he ever ask about the patient's condition before demanding your ID?" "No. He asked if there had been an assault." "Did he read you your Miranda rights at any point?" "No." "Did he tell you what specific lawful order you were refusing?" "He just said I was being uncooperative and needed to be cleared from his scene." "And you have multiple witnesses, you said. Bystanders with phones?" "Yes, a lot of them." Eleanor closed her notepad. A thin, determined smile touched her lips. "Mr. Martinez, what you experienced today was not just unprofessional, it was illegal. Officer Holloway had no authority to interfere with active, life-saving medical treatment. Your duty to your patient under state law and your professional license superseded his demand for paperwork. This arrest is unlawful, the charges are baseless, and we are going to make them regret the moment he laid a hand on you." Her confidence was a balm on his frayed nerves. For the first time since the ordeal began, he felt a flicker of hope. "What about my patient?" he asked, the question that had been tormenting him. "Do you know anything?" Eleanor's expression softened for a moment. "Your partner said he was transported to University Hospital. They were working on him, but Sam didn't know his condition. That's the first call I'll make when I leave here." She stood up, her focus returning. "They can legally hold you for a few more hours while they process the paperwork. Don't speak to anyone. Don't answer any questions. I'll be back with your release papers shortly. And then, the real fight begins." She turned and walked away, her heels clicking with purpose on the tile floor, leaving Leo with the powerful feeling that he was no longer a lone victim, but a client with a formidable champion. True to her word, Eleanor Vance returned in just under 2 hours. The charges of obstruction and resisting were still technically on the books, but she assured Leo they were a phantom menace that would evaporate under the slightest scrutiny. The heavy cell door swung open, and Leo stepped out, the air of the bullpen suddenly feeling liberating. He collected his belongings, his wallet, his phone with a dozen missed calls, his shoelaces, and signed the release forms without a word. Sergeant Miller avoided his gaze. Sam was waiting for him in the station lobby, his face etched with worry. He looked exhausted, as if he'd aged 5 years in the past 3 hours. He stood up as Leo approached. "Leo, I'm so sorry. I tried." "You did everything right, Sam," Leo said, clapping him on the shoulder. "You made the calls. You stayed with the patient. That's what matters." He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the answer to the question that mattered more than his own freedom. "Tell me about Mark." Sam's jaw tightened. He looked down at the floor before meeting Leo's eyes. His expression was grim. It was bad, Leo. Really bad. We got his pulse back in the field after 2 rounds of CPR and another shot of epi, but he was down for almost 4 minutes. By the time we got him to the ER at university, he was unstable. They rushed him straight to the ICU. 4 minutes. In the world of emergency medicine, 4 minutes of cardiac arrest without oxygen was an eternity. It was the threshold where permanent brain damage begins. An anoxic brain injury, a devastating, life-altering condition caused by a complete lack of oxygen to the brain. I just got off the phone with the charge nurse, Sam continued, his voice low. He's alive, but he's on a ventilator, in a medically induced coma. They're trying to limit the swelling in his brain. The doctors, they're not sure what the outcome will be. They don't know how much of him is going to be there if he wakes up. The words hit Leo like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. It was the outcome he had feared most. Mark wasn't dead, but a part of him might be gone forever. His ability to speak, to walk, to recognize his own wife, all of it was now in jeopardy. And it was all because of the delay, the stolen minutes, the syringe knocked from his hand, the time he spent in handcuffs while his patient suffocated. This wasn't just a case of wrongful arrest anymore. This was a catastrophic medical event caused by police interference. Eleanor Vance, who had been standing a few feet away giving them space, now stepped forward. She had overheard the conversation, and her expression was like stone. "This changes everything," she said, her voice devoid of emotion but carrying immense weight. "This is no longer just about your civil rights, Mr. Martinez. It's about what Officer Holloway's actions cost that man and his family. The city's liability just went from significant to astronomical." Leo looked past her, through the glass doors of the police station. He could see the patrol cars in the lot, the officers coming and going, a system moving on with its day. But for him, for Mark's wife Sarah, the world had stopped and shattered that morning in the park. His initial anger and humiliation now coalesced into something harder, something colder, a quiet, burning resolve. This could not be swept under the rug. This could not end with a quiet dismissal of charges and a half-hearted apology. What happened to Mark needed to be answered for. "What do we do now?" Leo asked, his voice steady. Eleanor met his gaze. "Now," she said, "we go on the offensive. We're not just going to clear your name. We're going to hold them accountable for every second they stole from that man." Within a week, Eleanor Vance had filed a federal lawsuit in the U.S. District Court. The defendants were Officer Dean Holloway, the River City Police Department, and the city of River City itself. The complaint was a masterwork of legal precision, a cold, factual narrative of the events that had transpired in Liberty Park. It cited violations of Leo's Fourth Amendment rights against unlawful seizure and 14th Amendment rights to due process. Crucially, it included a claim of state-created danger, arguing that the officer's actions had not just been negligent, but had actively and foreseeably created the life-threatening situation that followed. The lawsuit detailed Leo's 15 years of exemplary service, the specific medical protocols for treating anaphylaxis, and the catastrophic, well-documented consequences of delaying treatment. It included a preliminary statement from Sam Jones and affidavits from 2 of the bystanders who had recorded the incident on their phones. The lawsuit didn't ask for a specific dollar amount. It simply stated they were seeking compensatory and punitive damages to be determined by a jury. The city's legal department received the filing. Their initial reaction was predictable. They saw it as a nuisance, an attempt by a disgruntled employee to cash in. They were used to lawsuits, and their standard procedure was to drag things out, to wear down the plaintiff with motions and delays until they accepted a lowball settlement. 3 weeks after the filing, Eleanor received a call from the city's lead attorney, a man named Marcus Thorne. His tone was dismissive, almost bored. "Eleanor," he said, the familiarity a calculated move to establish dominance. "I've reviewed the complaint in the Martinez case. Look, we all know how these things go. Your client got his feelings hurt. The officer may have been a little overzealous. Let's not make this into a federal case. Oh, wait, he chuckled. Tell you what, to make this go away, the city is prepared to offer $25,000, a nuisance value settlement. Your client signs an NDA, the charges are formally dropped, and we all move on. Eleanor was silent for a moment on the other end of the line. She let the insult hang in the air. $25,000. It was an amount so laughably small, it was designed to be offensive. It was the city's way of saying they didn't believe the case had any merit. Marcus, she finally said, her voice dangerously calm. Let me be very clear. We are not accepting your offer. In fact, I am insulted you would even suggest it. Your officer's actions have potentially left a man with permanent brain damage. Your offer doesn't even cover the first day of his ICU bill. This isn't about hurt feelings. This is about a fundamental violation of my client's rights and a catastrophic breach of public trust. Thorne's condescending tone wavered slightly. It's a he said, she said situation, Eleanor. The officer will say your client was belligerent and non-compliant. That's where you're wrong, Marcus, she countered. It's not a he said, she said. It's a what the video shows situation. I have 2 bystander videos, and I have a feeling Officer Holloway's body camera is going to tell the exact same story. So my counteroffer is this. We'll see you in discovery. She hung up the phone. When she relayed the city's offer to Leo later that day, he wasn't surprised. He felt a flash of anger, but it was quickly replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. They think this is a game, he said. They think they can put a price tag on what happened. They're testing us, Eleanor explained. They want to see if we'll fold. They don't know who they're dealing with. She leaned forward, her expression intense. Leo, I need you to understand what this means. Rejecting this offer means we are in for a long, hard fight. They will try to dig up dirt on you. They will question your record, your professionalism, your character. They will depose you for hours trying to trip you up. It's going to be grueling. Leo looked out the window of her office at the city skyline. He thought of Mark lying in a hospital bed, his family's life shattered. He thought of other paramedics, other EMTs, who might one day face a similar situation with an officer who believed his authority was absolute. Good, he said, turning back to face her. Let them try. This isn't just about me anymore. If we let them get away with this, it will happen again. Eleanor smiled. It was the answer she had expected. The first shot had been fired and they had fired back. The war had just begun. The discovery phase of a lawsuit is where the truth, buried under reports and recollections, is unearthed. For Eleanor Vance, it was a hunt, and the primary target was Officer Holloway's body camera footage. The city's attorneys tried to stall, claiming technical difficulties and procedural hurdles. But Eleanor was relentless, filing motion after motion to compel its release. After a month of legal wrangling, a digital file landed in her inbox. She, Leo, and her legal team gathered in a conference room to watch it for the first time. The footage began with Holloway in his patrol car, the mundane sounds of the radio filling the air. Then, the call for the Liberty Park incident. He arrived on scene, the camera lens jerky as he walked toward the pavilion. And then, there it was. The entire encounter, captured in high definition from the officer's perspective. The video was even more damning than Eleanor could have hoped. The camera's unblinking eye stripped away all ambiguity. It captured the clear signs of Mark's medical distress, the gasping, the swelling, the bluish lips. It captured Leo on his knees, his voice calm and professional, repeatedly identifying himself and the nature of the emergency. Officer, this man is in anaphylactic shock. I need space to work. The camera recorded Holloway stepping closer, his voice aggressive and dismissive. I need to see your ID. This is my scene now. It captured Leo's final attempt at reason. You are interfering with emergency medical treatment. That is against the law. I need you to step back. And then, it captured the most critical moment. The camera tilted down as Holloway reached out, then it lurched violently as he grabbed Leo and spun him around. The syringe was clearly visible, flying through the air. The sound was crystal clear. The metallic click of the handcuffs, Leo's desperate plea for someone to help his patient, his partner's panicked shouts, the wife's anguished cries. The footage continued for another 10 minutes. It showed Sam heroically taking over, starting CPR. It showed the chaos Holloway's actions had created. Most importantly, the camera's timestamp was irrefutable. It showed a delay of 3 minutes and 47 seconds from the moment Holloway initiated contact to the moment Sam was able to administer the second dose of epinephrine. In the world of anoxic brain injury, it was a lifetime. When the video ended, the conference room was silent. Leo stared at the blank screen, his face pale. Seeing it from the officer's point of view, feeling the helplessness all over again, was gut-wrenching. "They're finished," Eleanor said, her voice quiet but absolute. "There is no explanation for that. No defense, no justification. That video shows a police officer with no medical training actively preventing a licensed paramedic from rendering life-saving care to a dying man, and then arresting him for trying to do so." The body camera footage became the cornerstone of their case. They deposed the bystanders who had also recorded the incident, their videos corroborating the body cam from different angles. They deposed Sam, whose testimony was a heartbreaking second-by-second account of watching his partner get arrested while their patient crashed. They even deposed Sergeant Miller, the booking sergeant. Under oath, Miller was cautious but truthful. "Did Mr. Martinez appear to be a threat when he was brought in?" Eleanor asked. "No, counselor." "Did Officer Holloway's verbal report to you seem consistent with a standard obstruction charge?" Miller hesitated. "It was unusual circumstances." "Unusual in what way, Sergeant?" "It's not every day you see a paramedic in cuffs for trying to do his job at a medical scene." The deposition transcripts, the bystander videos, and the body camera footage were woven together into an undeniable tapestry of misconduct. The city's initial strategy of portraying Leo as an uncooperative hothead was crumbling. The objective, unblinking eye of the camera had recorded the truth, and the truth was that Officer Holloway had acted not as a peacekeeper, but as an agent of chaos and harm. The city's attorneys knew they were in trouble. The question was whether they truly understood how much. While the video evidence painted a damning picture of Officer Holloway's actions, Eleanor Vance knew that to win the case, she had to definitively and scientifically link those actions to the harm suffered by Mark. The final, crucial piece of the puzzle lay within the hundreds of pages of Mark's hospital records. She hired a top medical expert, a renowned neurologist and critical care specialist, to review the entire file. The records told a grim story. They documented Mark's arrival in the emergency room, his critical state, and the immediate aggressive measures taken to stabilize him. They detailed his time in the ICU, the ventilator, the induced coma, the battery of tests and brain scans. But the most important piece of information was in the initial consultation notes written by Dr. Isabella Rossi, the attending physician in the ER on the day of the incident. Dr. Rossi was a veteran ER doctor, known for her clinical precision and her unflappable demeanor in the face of trauma. Her notes were not written for a lawsuit. They were written as a medical record, a pure, unbiased account of the patient's condition. In a section detailing the patient's history, she had written, "Patient is a 45-year-old male with a known severe bee allergy who suffered an anaphylactic reaction leading to cardiac arrest. Per paramedic report, there was a significant multi-minute delay in the administration of a second dose of epinephrine due to interference at the scene by law enforcement. This delay in definitive care almost certainly contributed to the patient's prolonged hypoxia and subsequent anoxic brain injury. The patient's prognosis is currently guarded." It was the smoking gun. A respected, objective medical professional had, on the day of the event, independently concluded that the delay caused by police had directly led to the patient's devastating brain injury. Eleanor scheduled Dr. Rossi's deposition. The city's attorneys, led by Marcus Thorne, came prepared to challenge her, to suggest she was speculating, to imply that the paramedic's report was self-serving. They were met with a wall of calm, scientific certainty. Thorne began his questioning. Dr. Rossi, you state that the delay almost certainly contributed to his injury. Isn't it possible that the patient's reaction was so severe that the outcome would have been the same regardless of this alleged delay? Dr. Rossi adjusted her glasses and looked at him as if he were a particularly slow medical student. Counselor, in cases of anaphylaxis, time is the single most critical factor. The progressive airway obstruction leads to hypoxia, which leads to cardiac arrest, which leads to anoxic brain injury. Epinephrine is the primary treatment to halt that progression. While it is impossible to say with 100% certainty what an alternate outcome would have been, it is my firm medical opinion that a 3 to 4 minute delay in administering epinephrine to a patient in severe distress exponentially increases the probability of a catastrophic outcome like the one Mr. Brennan suffered. To suggest the delay was inconsequential is to ignore basic medical science. She was unshakable. She explained the cellular mechanisms of oxygen deprivation, the cascade of failure in the body, the established protocols from every major medical association in the world. She wasn't an advocate. She was a teacher, and the city's legal team were her reluctant pupils. When it was Eleanor's turn, her questions were simple and direct. Dr. Rossi, in your professional experience, have you ever heard of a medical protocol that requires a paramedic to stop treating a dying patient to present identification to a police officer? Absolutely not. That would be a gross violation of the standard of care. Is it fair to say that in a situation like the one described, the paramedic, Mr. Martinez, was acting as the highest medical authority on the scene? He was the only medical authority on the scene. His judgment regarding immediate treatment should have been paramount. And in your expert medical opinion, did the actions of Officer Holloway by preventing the timely administration of epinephrine directly cause or contribute to the severity of Mark Brennan's brain injury? Yes, Dr. Rossi stated, her voice clear and firm. Without question. The deposition was over. The city's defense was not just crippled, it was annihilated. They now had irrefutable video evidence of misconduct and indisputable medical testimony that this misconduct had led to a man's life being permanently altered. The case was no longer about whether they would lose. It was about how much they would have to pay for what Officer Holloway had done. The day of Officer Dean Holloway's deposition was gray and overcast, mirroring the atmosphere in the sterile conference room of a downtown law firm. Holloway arrived flanked by Marcus Thorne and a steely-eyed attorney from the police union. He carried himself with a defiant swagger, a man who still believed he was the victim, a cop whose authority had been unjustly challenged. He had no idea he was walking into a meticulously prepared legal ambush. Eleanor Vance began the deposition calmly, starting with his background, his training, and his time on the force. For 6 hours, she led him through his version of the events of that day, her questions precise and seemingly innocuous. Holloway's narrative was a masterclass in self-serving revisionism. He painted Leo as agitated and aggressive. He claimed he couldn't tell if the situation was a medical emergency or the result of a crime. He insisted his actions were based on officer safety and the need to control the scene. Then Eleanor's tone shifted. She had lulled him into a comfortable pattern of justifying his actions. Now, it was time to dismantle them. Officer Holloway, she began, you stated you needed to control the scene. At the moment you arrived, what was the primary, immediate threat you observed? The scene was chaotic, he replied. There were people yelling, the paramedic was agitated. But was there a weapon, a physical fight in progress, a threat to public safety? Holloway shifted in his seat. The threat was the unknown. I had to ascertain what was happening. You testified you saw a man on the ground who appeared to be in distress. Is that correct? Yes. Did you notice his skin color? The fact he was turning blue? I was taking in the totality of the circumstances. That's not my question, officer. Did you or did you not observe the clear signs of cyanosis, a hallmark of oxygen deprivation? The union lawyer interjected, Objection. Assumes facts not in evidence. He's under oath, counselor, Eleanor shot back. He can answer. Holloway faltered. I'm not a doctor. I couldn't make that diagnosis. Exactly, Eleanor pounced. You're not a doctor. But Mr. Martinez is a licensed paramedic with 15 years of experience. Did you hear him tell you multiple times that the man was having a severe anaphylactic reaction? He said something to that effect, yes. Did you hear him tell you the patient could die if treatment was delayed? He was being uncooperative. Did you consider for even a moment that he might know more about the medical situation than you did? Silence. Eleanor signaled to her paralegal, who dimmed the lights and played the body camera footage on a large screen in the room. She paused it at the exact moment Holloway grabbed Leo. Officer, please describe what is happening on the screen. Holloway stared at his own image, his face a mask of aggression. I was attempting to take the suspect into custody after he resisted. What he is holding in his hand, officer? The object that went flying when you assaulted him? It appears to be a syringe. The same syringe Mr. Martinez told you contained life-saving medication for the dying man at his feet? Is that correct? The union lawyer objected again, but the damage was done. The video played on, showing the patient crashing, the frantic CPR, the chaos Holloway had single-handedly created. For the final hour, Eleanor confronted him with every inconsistency in his story, every contradiction between his testimony and the irrefutable video evidence. His composure cracked. His swagger evaporated, replaced by a sullen, defensive anger. He had built his defense on a foundation of lies, and Eleanor Vance had just methodically demolished it, brick by brick. When the deposition concluded, Marcus Thorne, the city's attorney, looked pale. He had just watched his star witness self-destruct. The confident officer who had walked in that morning had been exposed as an unreliable narrator whose actions were indefensible. The transcript of the deposition, when read alongside the doctor's report and the video, told a story not of a police officer maintaining order, but of a man with a badge whose ego had nearly cost another man his life. The fight wasn't over, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The day after Holloway's disastrous deposition, Eleanor's phone rang. It was Marcus Thorne. The condescending swagger was gone from his voice, replaced by a strained, pragmatic tone. Eleanor, he began, dispensing with the pleasantries. We've reviewed the deposition. We're prepared to reevaluate our position. Let's talk seriously about a settlement. I'm listening, Eleanor said, her voice neutral. The city is prepared to offer your client $350,000 to resolve all claims, Thorne said. It was a significant jump from their initial insulting offer. It was an admission of liability, an acknowledgement that they knew they had a losing hand. It was the kind of offer that many plaintiffs, worn down by the legal process, would have seriously considered. Eleanor took the offer to Leo that afternoon. She laid it out for him objectively. It's a substantial amount of money, Leo. It would compensate you for what you went through and provide some measure of security. No one would blame you for taking it. A trial is always a risk, no matter how strong our case is. Leo sat in the conference room, the same one where they had watched the body cam footage. He thought about the number. $350,000. It was more money than he'd ever seen in one place. But then he thought about Mark Brennan. By this point, Mark had been moved from the ICU to a long-term neurological care facility. He had emerged from his coma, but the anoxic brain injury had left him severely impaired. He struggled with speech, memory, and motor control. His life, and the lives of his family, had been irrevocably damaged. The vibrant 45-year-old man from the park was gone. What happens to Officer Holloway if we take this offer? Leo asked. Eleanor's expression was grim. The city will likely require him to undergo some additional training. They might put a letter in his file. But with a settlement and a non-disclosure agreement, the incident gets buried. He stays on the force. He keeps his badge and his gun. In a year, it's like it never happened. That was the sticking point. The thought of Dean Holloway continuing to wear a uniform, continuing to hold a position of power where his flawed judgment could harm another person, was unacceptable. The money had never been the primary motivator. It was about accountability. It was about ensuring this never happened again. "No," Leo said, his voice firm. He looked Eleanor in the eye. "The answer is no. This isn't about me. If we settle now, the system that allowed him to do this remains unchanged. The policies that failed to check his behavior remain in place. Another paramedic, another patient will be in the same position someday. We can't let that happen." He leaned forward, his conviction clear. "I want this to go to mediation, or I want it to go to trial. I want a jury to see that video. I want them to hear from Dr. Rossi. I want this to be public. I want the police department to be forced to change its policies so that medical care is never, ever interfered with again. That's the only settlement I'm interested in." Eleanor Vance felt a surge of pride in her client. He was a man of principle, willing to risk a financial windfall for a greater good. Many people talked about wanting justice, but few were willing to endure the brutal, personal cost of fighting for it all the way to the end. Leo Martinez was one of the few. "I was hoping you'd say that," she said, a determined smile returning to her face. "I'll call Thorne and let him know. It's time we stopped talking about money and started talking about reform." The city had tried to buy their way out of trouble. They had failed to understand that for Leo, this was never about the price. It was about the principle. The city, stunned by Leo's rejection of a significant six-figure offer, reluctantly agreed to mediation. It was a final, last-ditch effort to avoid the public spectacle and unpredictable outcome of a jury trial. The mediation was held in the office of a retired federal judge, a man named Arthur Vance, known for his sharp intellect and no-nonsense approach to dispute resolution. He had seen thousands of cases, and he had a finely tuned sense for the strengths and weaknesses of an argument. The morning session was a presentation of cases. The city's legal team, led by a visibly stressed Marcus Thorne, went first. They tried to frame the incident as a tragic misunderstanding, a clash of protocols between two different emergency services. They argued that Officer Holloway was a young, well-intentioned officer who made a split-second misjudgment in a chaotic environment. They downplayed the severity of the delay and suggested that Mark Brennan's tragic outcome was primarily due to the severity of his allergic reaction, not the officer's actions. They made a new, final offer, $500,000. Then, it was Eleanor Vance's turn. She didn't rely on rhetoric. She simply presented the evidence. She started by playing the body camera footage on a large screen in the center of the room. The video played without commentary, its raw, objective truth filling the silence. The judge watched, his expression unreadable, as the scene unfolded. The calm paramedic, the aggressive officer, the click of the handcuffs, the patient crashing. Next, she presented the deposition transcripts. She read key excerpts from Dr. Rossi's testimony, her expert medical opinion linking the delay directly to the anoxic brain injury. Then she read from Holloway's deposition, highlighting his contradictions, his evasions, and his ultimate inability to justify his actions when confronted with the video evidence. Finally, she put up a picture of Mark Brennan. Not the man in the hospital bed, but a photo from a month before the incident. He was smiling, standing with his wife and two teenage children, a vibrant, healthy man. The contrast with his current condition was heartbreaking and powerful. "This case is not about a misunderstanding," Eleanor concluded, her voice steady and clear. "It is about an abuse of authority. It is about a police officer who abandoned his duty to protect and serve and instead chose to prioritize his own ego over a man's life. The price of that choice is not something that can be calculated in a settlement offer. It requires real, systemic change to ensure it never happens again." The mediator, Judge Vance, called for a lunch break. When they reconvened, he asked to speak to the city's legal team alone. The door to the conference room closed. 20 minutes later, Marcus Thorne and his team emerged, their faces ashen. The judge then called everyone back into the room. He looked directly at Thorne and the other city representatives. His voice was calm, but carried the immense weight of his experience on the federal bench. "Gentlemen," he began, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I've heard your arguments and I've reviewed the core evidence presented by Ms. Vance. I'm going to be very blunt with you. You are going to lose this case. Badly." He leaned forward. "A jury is going to watch that video, and they will see an officer bully and arrest a paramedic who was trying to save a man's life. They will hear a respected doctor testify that the officer's actions directly contributed to a catastrophic brain injury. They will see a family destroyed. They will not see a misunderstanding. They will see a gross abuse of power." He let the words sink in. "Your $500,000 offer is an insult. If this case goes to a jury, you are not looking at a 6-figure verdict. You are looking at an 8-figure verdict. A verdict that will make headlines across the country. My advice to you is to stop trying to buy your way out of this cheaply. Go back to the city, tell them to open the vault, and come back with a number that reflects the damage your officer has done. And more importantly, you need to start talking about the policy changes Ms. Vance is demanding, because that is the only thing that might prevent a jury from punishing you with a punitive award that will cripple your city's budget for years to come. Settle this now." The judge's warning was not a suggestion. It was a verdict delivered before the trial had even begun. The city's legal team had nowhere left to run. The mediator's stark pronouncement shattered the city's remaining defenses. The legal team returned to their superiors not with a negotiation tactic, but with a dire warning. The risk of a public trial and a massive runaway jury verdict was too great to ignore. The negotiations that followed were no longer about whether the city would meet Leo and Eleanor's demands, but how quickly they could formalize the surrender. The final settlement was reached 2 weeks later. The financial component was staggering. The city agreed to pay a total of $12.5 million. A significant portion of this was placed in a trust to cover the lifetime medical care of Mark Brennan, ensuring his family would not have to bear the financial burden of his injuries. Leo Martinez received a substantial sum for the violation of his civil rights, the false arrest, and the emotional distress he had endured. But for Leo and Eleanor, the most important victory was not the money. It was the non-financial terms of the settlement, the mandatory institutional reforms they had fought for from the very beginning. The River City Police Department was required to implement a sweeping new set of policies governing all interactions with emergency medical personnel. The new protocol, which became known within the department as the Martinez Mandate, was explicit. It stated that at any active medical scene, the senior licensed medical professional, be it a paramedic or an EMT, was the ultimate authority on patient care. Police officers were explicitly instructed not to interfere with active treatment for administrative reasons, such as demanding identification or securing a non-criminal scene. Any conflict or dispute between police and medical personnel on a scene would require the immediate response of a police supervisor. Furthermore, any arrest of a first responder engaged in their official duties would trigger an automatic independent investigation by the Internal Affairs Division and the District Attorney's Office. As part of the settlement, the body camera footage from the incident was to be used as a mandatory training tool for every single officer on the force, from new recruits to seasoned veterans. They would have to watch what Holloway did. They would have to analyze his mistakes. They would have to learn what not to do. The final piece of the settlement concerned Officer Dean Holloway himself. The Internal Affairs investigation, which had been running concurrently with the civil suit, concluded a week after the settlement was announced. It found that Holloway had violated multiple department policies, including abuse of authority, interference with emergency services, and conduct unbecoming of an officer. Faced with the undeniable video evidence and the massive liability he had exposed the city to, the police chief had no choice. Dean Holloway was terminated from the River City Police Department, effective immediately. His badge, the symbol of the authority he had so profoundly misused, was taken from him. The news of the settlement and Holloway's firing made local and national headlines. It was a story of a stunning victory for an ordinary man against a powerful system. For Leo, the feeling was not one of triumph, but of somber validation. A measure of justice had been served. The changes he had fought for would protect his colleagues. They would, hopefully, save future patients from the fate that Mark Brennan had suffered. He stood on his front porch, reading the official termination letter that Eleanor had forwarded to him. It was just a piece of paper, but it represented the end of a long and brutal fight. The cost had been immense, not just in legal fees, but in emotional and psychological toil. But as he looked out at the quiet street, he knew he would make the same choice again. He had stood his ground not just for himself, but for his profession and for every patient who would ever need someone to fight for them when they couldn't fight for themselves. The settlement money provided Leo with a level of financial security he had never imagined. He could have retired, bought a house on a lake, and spent the rest of his days fishing, leaving the trauma of Liberty Park behind him. But Leo wasn't built that way. The fight had changed him. It had ignited a sense of responsibility that extended far beyond the borders of River City. He knew his case was not an isolated incident. He had received emails and messages from paramedics and EMTs across the country, sharing their own stories of police interference, of being bullied at scenes, of facing disciplinary action for prioritizing patient care. With the guidance of Eleanor Vance, he took a significant portion of his settlement and established the First Response Alliance, a national nonprofit legal defense fund for emergency medical responders. Its mission was simple: to provide top-tier legal representation free of charge to any paramedic, EMT, or firefighter who faced arrest, retaliation, or disciplinary action for performing their medical duties according to established protocols. It was a lifeline for those who, like him, found themselves in an impossible position, caught between their oath to a patient and an unlawful order from someone with a badge. The Alliance's launch was announced at a national EMS conference. Leo, who had always been a private man, found himself standing on a stage in front of thousands of his peers. He didn't talk about the money or the lawsuit. He talked about the moment the handcuffs clicked onto his wrists. He talked about the helpless feeling of watching his patient die while he was being dragged away. He talked about the importance of knowing your rights, of understanding the laws that protect you, and of having the courage to stand firm for your patient. They can threaten your job, they can threaten your freedom, he told the silent, captivated audience. But they can't take away your duty. Our first, last, and only duty is to the person whose life is in our hands. The First Response Alliance exists to make sure that when you make the right choice, you are not left to fight the consequences alone. The room erupted in a thunderous, sustained, standing ovation. His case and the body camera footage became a powerful educational tool. Medical schools used it to teach students about scene management and interagency conflict. Law schools used it as a case study in civil rights litigation and Fourth Amendment law. But its most important use was in police academies. Across the country, training instructors began incorporating the Martinez incident into their curriculum. They would show recruits the full, unedited video. They would pause it at critical moments and ask the question, what should this officer have done differently? The footage was a stark, visceral lesson in what not to do. It taught humility, the importance of recognizing the expertise of other professionals, and the devastating consequences of letting ego dictate actions at an emergency scene. It forced a generation of new officers to confront a scenario they might otherwise never consider, planting the seed that true control of a scene sometimes means stepping back and letting a medical expert do their job. Leo Martinez had never sought the spotlight. He was a paramedic who just wanted to help people. But by refusing to back down, he had been transformed from a victim of the system into a powerful advocate for change. He had created a shield for his colleagues and a lesson for law enforcement that would resonate for years to come. The impact of the Martinez case continued to ripple outwards, moving beyond police departments and training academies into the halls of government. Inspired by the public outcry and the clear legal and moral failings exposed by the lawsuit, a bipartisan group of state legislators approached Eleanor Vance. They wanted to do more than just rely on departmental policy changes, which could be rewritten or ignored by future administrations. They wanted to codify the protection for first responders into state law. Eleanor and Leo worked tirelessly with the legislators to draft the bill. It was to be called the Emergency Responder Protection Act, but everyone at the state capitol knew it by its unofficial name, Leo's Law. The bill was simple, direct, and powerful. It legally established that in an active medical emergency, the senior-most medical provider on scene has legal authority over the treatment and transport of the patient. It made it a criminal offense for any person, including a law enforcement officer, to intentionally interfere with a first responder performing their official medical duties. The law created a clear legal hierarchy for emergency scenes, removing the ambiguity that had allowed Officer Holloway's disastrous intervention to occur. Medical necessity, the law stated, took precedence over non-criminal law enforcement objectives. The legislative hearings were profoundly moving. Eleanor Vance presented the legal arguments, laying out the case with her signature precision. Leo testified, not as a legal expert, but as a paramedic, explaining the critical importance of the golden hour and the devastating, irreversible damage that even a few minutes of delay can cause. But the most powerful testimony came from Mark Brennan's wife, Sarah. She took the witness stand, her voice trembling but firm, and described what it was like to watch her husband suffocate while the paramedic trying to save him was arrested. She spoke of their life now, of the husband she had lost, and the full-time caregiver role she had been forced to assume. "My husband is alive because Leo Martinez refused to abandon him," she told the committee, her eyes filled with tears. "But my husband will never be the same, because another man with a badge decided his authority was more important than a human life. This law won't fix what happened to my family, but it can stop another family from ever having to go through this. I'm asking you to pass it, for Mark, and for all the other Marks out there." Her testimony was a turning point. It transformed the bill from a piece of policy into a moral imperative. The bill sailed through committee and passed both houses of the legislature with overwhelming, near-unanimous support. The political divisions that defined so much of modern life melted away in the face of such a clear and obvious need. The governor scheduled a formal signing ceremony at the state capitol. He stood at a podium, flanked by the bill's sponsors, with Eleanor Vance, Sarah Brennan, and Leo Martinez standing directly behind him. He spoke of the heroism of first responders and the need to provide them with every possible protection to do their life-saving work. Then he sat down and signed the bill into law. As the room filled with applause, the governor handed the ceremonial pen to Leo. It was a simple, symbolic gesture, but it represented the culmination of his long, painful journey. He had gone from a defendant in the back of a patrol car to an honored guest at the state capitol. His personal battle for justice had resulted in a permanent legal shield for every one of his colleagues. He hadn't just won a lawsuit, he had changed the law. A few months after the bill was signed into law, Leo Martinez did something that surprised many people who knew his story. He went back to work. He reported for his shift at Fire Station 5, put on his uniform, and stepped back into Ambulance 22 with his partner Sam. He didn't have to. The settlement had made him financially independent for life. But being a paramedic wasn't just a job for Leo. It was a core part of his identity. The streets were where he was needed, where he could make a difference. Something had changed, however. When his ambulance arrived at a scene and a police car pulled up behind them, there was a new dynamic. The officers were different. They kept their distance. They focused on traffic and crowd control. They would ask, "Medics, what do you need from us?" There was a new deference, a new respect. The Martinez incident had become a powerful institutional memory. Leo still felt a knot tighten in his stomach whenever he worked a scene with the police. The trauma of that day in the park would never fully leave him. But he also knew that the rules of engagement had fundamentally shifted in his favor, and in favor of his patient. The law was now on his side, a silent, powerful partner on every call. His story became a quiet legend within the EMS community. New EMTs would hear about Leo's Law and the paramedic who got arrested for saving a life, the man who fought the system and won. He never sought the accolades, often changing the subject when people brought it up. The real victory for him was not in the fame, but in the quiet confidence he saw in younger paramedics, who now knew they had a legal right to stand their ground for their patients. He had fought the battle once, so they would never have to. The money, the policy changes, the law, they were all important victories. But the true measure of what had been accomplished in that long, arduous fight was simpler. It was in the thousands of future interactions between cops and medics that would now go differently. It was in the patient whose care would not be delayed. It was in the family that would not be shattered. The legacy wasn't Leo's name on a law, it was in the lives that would be saved because of it. One man's refusal to back down had created a ripple of change that would protect countless others for generations to come. That was the only legacy that ever mattered. When we look back at the cascade of failures that morning in Liberty Park, it's easy to paint Officer Holloway as a simple villain. But the truth is often more complex. His actions didn't spring from a vacuum. They likely grew from a culture of policing that sometimes prioritizes absolute control over situational awareness, a training regimen that emphasizes compliance above all else, and perhaps a personal insecurity that saw a calm, professional paramedic's focus on his patient not as a necessity, but as a personal slight. Holloway was a young officer, and in his mind, he may have genuinely believed he was securing a scene, applying a rigid, one-size-fits-all procedure to a situation that demanded flexibility and deference to expertise. His failure wasn't just a momentary lapse in judgment, it was a failure of imagination, an inability to see beyond the narrow lens of his own authority. For Leo, the path he took was the only one his conscience would allow. But what if he had chosen differently? What if, under the threat of arrest, he had stepped back from his patient? He might have saved his career from turmoil, avoided a legal battle, and kept his name out of the papers. But he would have had to live with the knowledge that he had complied with an unlawful order at the direct expense of his patient's life. The moral injury would have been greater than any jail cell. What his story teaches us is that sometimes the most courageous act is not one of action, but of steadfast refusal. The refusal to be complicit in a wrong, the refusal to abandon one's duty, the refusal to let a bad system have the final say. His journey reminds us that true strength is often quiet, found not in aggression, but in the unwavering commitment to a just cause, even when you're standing alone. The ultimate lesson here is one of profound and simple humanity. The uniform, the badge, the license, they are symbols of a duty, not a rank. The highest duty, the one that must supersede all others in a moment of crisis, is the preservation of a human life. Leo Martinez understood that. Officer Holloway did not. That single defining difference set in motion a story of tragedy, resilience, and ultimately redemption, not for one man, but for an entire system. What do you think is the single most important factor that allowed Leo to win his fight? And how can we better support first responders who face similar pressures in their own communities? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.